Okay, good morning. My name is Jovanna Godínez, and I will be presenting what is reflective practice and collaboration, and how this is helpful for English language teachers in whatever context you may be working in. So, the title of this presentation is Teaching, Critical Reflecting, and Collaborating. Together, they enable continuous professional development in ELT. So let's go ahead and start. Now, before we engage in reflective practice, which is the core theoretical background of this presentation, we need to make a clear difference, a clear distinction between the several notions that there are regarding continuous professional development. Now, usually, we talk about teacher training, teacher professional development, and continuous professional development. But there's a difference between these three. And to have this difference clear is going to help us in understanding which one suits reflective practice better, and hence, continuous professional development. So, teacher training is when we receive instructional knowledge regarding our field, English language teaching. This means methodological aspects, the know-hows of how to plan a class, how to sit students, organize students, manage a classroom, manage seating, manage time. All of this instructional knowledge is only to help us become language teachers and have the instructional knowledge, right? But then we move on to teacher professional development. And when we talk about teacher professional development, is once we are already in-service teachers, we're already teaching in whatever context, and then we access or we are able to attend conferences such as this one, such as BBELT, other international conferences, but also teacher training programs that our institution has or holds for us, right? So you see, teacher training, it starts with instructional knowledge, us becoming and obtaining knowledge to become language teachers. And then we move on to having professional development, which has more to do with our institutional goals, our institution's aims, the coordination of our programs or institutions, and what they aim for us as professionals. And then we have continuous professional development. Now, the difference between the previous two and continuous professional development is that in continuous professional development, the needs for professional development, the need for professional growth comes from within us, from our personal perceived needs for preparation. Now, your need as a professional in ELT might not be the same one that I have. Hence, I will look at my teaching style, my teaching beliefs, my teaching methods, and see which ones are affecting positively my students' learning, and what I need to work on, develop to become a better teacher. Now, this continuous professional development comes from within us, our needs, and our personal teaching styles. So, if we take these three terms, which are always intertwined or somewhat intertwined, then we can see or perceive why continuous professional development belongs to reflective practice. And reflective practice is also something that comes intrinsic, something that comes from within us. How we reflect and how we think about our teaching is something personal. This is why continuous professional development is linked to reflective practice, as opposed to the other two, because those two are bottom up, they come from the outside in, and continuous professional development comes from the inside out. Now, these terms, now that we have this distinction, we can talk about certain aspects of teachers and how they, certain qualities, certain natural or innate qualities that we have as people, as persons, as professionals, enable or facilitate continuous professional development. Now, there is an author, Michael Wallace, a long time ago, in 1991. He said, in order for any professional in language teaching to be able to actually develop, and sustain that development, we need certain qualities as a person. So the first one is willingness. The willingness to actually engage in a professional program, in a continuous professional development course, and fulfill it, and then actually do something with it. That willingness. I'm not being forced by an institution. I'm not being forced by anyone else. It's something that comes from within me, a need that I have as a professional. And then he talks about flexibility. When we are flexible, we are able to deconstruct and reconstruct our beliefs as teachers. So sometimes we are set in our beliefs, in our ways. And when we are very set, it is hard to understand and to accept other theories, other methods, other approaches, other ways of teaching. So Michael Wallace said, well, you not only need willingness to participate, you also have to be flexible with how you think and how you perceive things and on your ways, right? So we have certain ways of teaching. We have to be flexible in trying to deconstruct those ways to achieve better goals, better learning outcomes. Now, along with flexibility, we have to be open to change. And we are open to change, then we are open to different opinions, to different beliefs, to different ways. And once we are open and understand and comprehend that there are different ways, then we are able to take responsibility and take action regarding something that I don't understand, that I don't perceive as something that I usually do, but that I am willing and open to try. And the responsibility comes because we take action, we move forward, and we understand that we don't always know everything, and that my way is not the best way, it's just one way out of many. And this goes to the final quality of a person who is willing to engage in continuous professional development, which is open to collaboration. At times, we are, like I said before, we are very fixed in our notions, very fixed in our ways, and we are not able to open up and ask for help when something is not going the way it should. If we are not able to collaborate with others and share our own lesson plans and share what we do in the class, it's quite challenging to do things always on our own. So he says, when we want to engage, Michael Wallace, when we want to engage in continuous professional development, you need to know the difference between teacher training, professional development, continuous professional development, and then also you need to possess certain qualities, certain teacher readiness in order to engage in this process. And he states these 5 main qualities. Now, when I did my research specifically in this area, I did notice that the teachers, my research participants who were able to engage in continuous professional development, all of them possess, if not all, at least the majority of these qualities. Now, when we engage in continuous professional development, the purpose is really to become better teachers, to have better learning outcomes, right? But overall, how and where does my continuous professional development affect or impact in my community of practice? Now, what is a community of practice? What is the importance of having a community of practice? Well, communities of practice are groups of people who share concerns, who share problems, passions about a topic, and usually, more often than not, share teaching contexts. It is easier for me to collaborate and to belong to a community of practice who shares my teaching context, the same type of students, the same level, perhaps, right? Than it is to collaborate with teachers from other contexts, because our problems and our difficulties might be different. So the importance of a community of practice and belonging to a community of practice and being able to collaborate is that everything I am and everything I do as a language teacher, more often than not, has an impact on my community of practice, on my teaching context, in my students, Otherwise, what would be the point of engaging in continuous professional development? A philosopher once said, if I am what I am, but I am not what I am for others, then what is the point, right? So everything I do and everything I become as a professional needs to have an impact on your society, on your context. Otherwise, why do it, right? Now, when you belong to a community of practice, there are several benefits to this. You gain greater awareness, right? You increase motivation because sometimes having difficulties, and when you deal with them on your own, but then being able to share them with other colleagues, that's when it makes a difference. That's when you realize that you're not on your own, you're not by yourself, and that you are able to talk about your issues with other teachers that might be having the same problems. You become empowered because after sharing knowledges, after sharing difficulties, and then trying to figure them out together, you become that gains community, right? That gains collegiality. And collegiality means being able to discuss and to talk about professional matters without being too engaged emotionally and just for the sake of figuring out things for my job, right? For our profession, for our students' learning outcomes, okay? And overall, it avoids isolation because working as a teacher, most of our job is planning and grading and teaching. And at times it becomes isolated. It becomes an individual's performance. However, when we view teaching and when we view ourselves as part of a community, that perception changes. And then my difficulties are not so my own, they are part of the community. And the way I can deal with them also has to do with how I belong to my community, right? Now that we have these three theoretical notions quite set, what is continuous professional development? What are the qualities that a professional needs in order to engage in this process? And then where does this fit? Where does my professional development, have place in a community of practice? Then we can talk about reflection, okay? Before I talk about what reflective practice is and how it has implications for language teaching, I'm going to describe a little bit the context of where I carried out several of my investigations. I have carried out investigations here in Mexico with in-service elementary school teachers in Mexico City, the central part of Mexico, with teacher trainers at a national 60-hour updating course, which I was providing, and then with foreign exchange teachers from Ireland and the USA who were working in Mexico at that time. So you see, it's not just one specific context, it's not just teaching, it's with teachers in service, it's with teacher trainers who have been academic consultants here in Mexico for quite some time, and then with foreign exchange teachers who at that time were working here in Mexico. And you see, because English language teaching, when we think about it, we always think of the classroom, right? The classroom setting. However, ELT has many settings, and these are just three of the many that I've had the opportunity to do research on. Now, when I engaged in this research processes, I always had questions that I wanted to ask my participants. And these questions were the pivotal point, the starting point for the investigation, for the long-term investigation. So these questions are the following. What is reflection or reflexivity? Why would it be valuable for a language teacher to engage in either one of them? Like, what for? Why would I need to reflect? And I ask these questions to you as well. Why would you need to reflect? What is the purpose of reflecting, right? Do I reflect? Do I even reflect on my teaching? And if I do, what do these forms of reflection take up? How do they form? What are they? Do I write something down? Are they just in my mind, right? Do I just think of today was a great teaching day or today really sucked, right? Today was a bad teaching day. So how do I reflect? What forms do my reflections take, And then very important, what happens after I reflect. So then what? So, and this is quite important, because usually when we reflect and we say, oh, it was a really good teaching day. And then when things don't go our way, it was a bad teaching day. But then we have the next class and we have to get over that, right? And we have to move on to the next class and say, well, let's start over again. So, but reflection needs time. Reflection needs a moment, You need to catch your breath and say, well, what went well and what didn't go so well? And then look at the last question, which is the prime objective of reflective practice. Have my reflections favored my practice, my community of practice, or my students? So these questions are just the opening part of a research project, okay? Sometimes, as teachers, as we have hectic lives, as we have a lot going on and a lot of grading and planning to do, we forget how we're doing things and why we're doing things in a certain way. So these questions help me enable teachers to start thinking of their teaching practice and the teaching beliefs and the teaching paradigms. And when we stop thinking about this, and when we don't think about them, then we're doing things just automatically as robots, right? We're not even thinking of what we're doing and if what we're doing is actually helpful for our students. So that's the purpose of reflective practice. The purpose is to help us think and process why we do things the way we do. Now, after engaging in many investigations here in Mexico, my country of residence, in reflective practice, I came up with this cycle. And this cycle has to do with how can we engage in reflective practice and actually make a difference for ourselves and for our students. If you look at the QR code, there are 2 articles that I have written on reflective practice. They have been published on the Journal of Taylor and Francis and Routledge Online for reflective practice. And this is the main contribution that I've come up with, that I've set forward. First of all, the teachers need to be ready to engage in the process. We need to be able to systematize this process by thinking, by having a moment to say, well, how was my teaching practice? How was my classroom set up? Did it went well and why, right? And then once we engage in this process, we are able to select ways to reflect. For instance, personally, I like talking to colleagues. I also like writing down things in my lesson plan and in the programs, just to remember that I can, change things for the next time around, not for this class, but perhaps for the next one. If I don't write these changes, I find it difficult to remember them because I have so many classes, right? And then I always seek for collegial support. This is the aspect that I contributed to the field. Reflective practice used to be something that I would do on my own. I would reflect, I would think, and then if things went badly, I would be ashamed or embarrassed to talk about them with colleagues, so I would keep them to myself, right? But I have found, and several of my participants also have found, that when you lose that embarrassment, that shame of saying, well, it didn't go so well, and I'm not doing things quite well, let me ask for help. That jump, of that bravery of asking for help does make a difference. And this is when reflective practice actually makes sense and actually starts working in favor of me as a professional, of my community of practice, because if I do things well, it impacts my students and my students' learning. But then if I'm doing something that works in the classroom, I can share it with my colleagues, they can replicate it in their classrooms, and then my community of practice is benefited, you see? So it's a cycle, an ongoing cycle. It doesn't stop, it never stops, it shouldn't stop, right? Because that enables my practice to change, if you can say it, to transform, but not only in the outer part as a professional, but more intrinsically in my context, for my students, with my colleagues, in my community, And that's when we see the benefits of reflective practice. So if you have any questions or would like to read any more, here is a QR code. Feel free to download the articles. And thank you so much.